Hello, and welcome to the Rossaround Backstage podcast, talking with artists, technicians, musicians, producers, directors, and all the interesting and talented people that make it all happen for you. Hi, everybody. This is Ross Pallone with the Rossaround Backstage podcast, and I'm bringing to you today an interview with drummer, composer, arranger, producer, music director, Jamey Tate. He has been out on the road and doing studio work with people like David Benoit, Mindy Abair, David Foster, Chris Walden, Dave Koz, and many, many other artists. He does films, TV, and records. And Jamey, I'd like to ask you my question. How did you get into this business?
That's actually it goes back a long, long way. My dad is in this business. So he's a guitar player. He played for years he toured with James Brown for a little bit, and he was in Vegas for years as, a guitar player. He worked in Atlanta as a session player, played on a bunch of records and stuff. And so when I was born, he was constantly introducing me to all kinds of music, everything from jazz and R&B and pop stuff, country stuff. He's from West Virginia, and he had a big country background. And somewhere along the way, I guess I was about 3, they got me a drum set. I was banging on stuff all the time, pots, pans, and, it's like, it almost feels cliche to say that because you hear a lot of drummers talk about that, but definitely pots and pans was the beginning.
Right.
And my parents said, why don't we get him a drum set and see how it goes? So I got my first drum set when I was 3, and it kind of never stopped from there.
That must have been like a little mini drum set.
It was
right?
small. It was small. But then it wasn't much longer after that. Okay, so at that point, my dad he wanted to get off the road to be dad more. And so he was doing more production and mostly stage production at that point, some record things and stuff but mostly stage work. He would have these show bands and things that he would produce and put in different places. And so one of the drummers in one of his groups sold him an older drum set of his. And so it was a Slingerland drum kit. I remember it had like Tolex on it. It like the
what's that?
Well, it's like the stuff that you'd see on a Rhodes, like that sort of, it looks like fake leather kind of, you know what I'm talking about? Like on the case of a Rhodes or something. It had that on the outside.
Fender Rhodes, not
Fender Rhodes,
not the roads that you drive on.
No, indeed. Fender Rhodes, or on like a case of an amplifier, on the outside of an amplifier. And so it had that on it, which was such a weird finish, I thought. But we took that off at some point and was just like this kind of, it was wrapped and then it wasn't wrapped, and I always had dreams of refinishing it and making it a pretty wood finish, which I never did. But I had that for years and years and years and years. And then, lessons started. I guess it was right after we had moved to Florida. I was born in Atlanta. And then we moved to Florida when I was 7. So I probably started lessons at about 8 years old. The weekly drum lessons with a guy named Ken Treat, who his kid and I are still friends on Facebook, which is kind of fun for me. My old drum teacher's kid. And started lessons and played in like the school choir. I would play like snare drum. We would do like Battle Hymn of the Republic or whatever, and I'd play snare drum.
Right.
And it progressed. I mean, I just never really left it. I played in the middle school jazz band and the concert band and the marching band when they would do parades. And then that carried over into high school, and I played in the jazz band in high school and in the wind ensemble and the concert band, and I would do a lot of marching band. I kind of started to get into drum corps at that point too, although I never marched a season, but I was really into it, and I had a lot of friends that marched back then.
Drum corps is different than the marching band.
Yeah, it's like marching band on steroids,
So is it just drummers?
No, it's drum and bugle. So it's all brass and percussion. So there's like a sideline percussion, like a pit, on the front. They call it front ensemble. And then the drum line itself on the field, and then the band is made up of bugles, all brass.
All bugles.
Yeah, so it's either, but there are contra bugles, which would be like a tuba.
Oh, okay. So it's not really just the little bugle.
No.
Like big instrument, small instrument.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. So it goes all the way across the sonic spectrum.
Right.
From bass, treble, whatever.
Because the first thing that would come to mind is like, that's going to be kind of weird with just a bunch of bugles.
A bunch of guys out there just going beep boop beep boop beep boop beep boop beep boop. No, it's a really really high form of marching band art. The drill is incredibly difficult. The technical needs of the drummer are way above and beyond like standard marching band. What you would think of as like a rudimental marching band is taking everything to a whole new extreme. And I really got hooked on that a lot in high school. And then I taught a lot of that, even though, again, like there were a lot of guys that I grew up with that were far more involved in that scene. I can think of a couple of guys like my friend Tony Durham, who we've remained very, very close over the years. He was my best man. I was his best man. He marched drum corps. Another friend, this guy, Matt Brown, who is a spectacular drummer in Orlando, rock drummer. These guys all marched, actually went out and did seasons of drum corps. And while I didn't, I liked to pay a lot of attention to what they came home with, after a summer of marching with Magic of Orlando or wherever they went off to march. And so I got pretty heavily into that, which I think was one of the one of the sort of motivating factors for me from a technical standpoint, really getting my chops together and strong, my rudimental playing, which benefited me down the road quite a bit. So, high school, I did all of that and studied with a lot of different guys around Orlando. And then college, I immediately got out of high school and went to a school in Orlando. It's called Rollins College. It's a very small little school it's a small music program, but a very good one, the little music program that could kind of,
Right. Well, it probably all came down to the instructor, right?
It really did. And they had some absolutely across the board, not just in the jazz program, which I was more heavily involved in, although I was also a classical percussion major. I studied with a woman named Beth Gottlieb, who is married to Danny Gottlieb. So I studied with Danny during that time, which was pretty awesome. I was really into all those early Pat Metheny records anyway. And so getting to study with a guy like Danny and go like, hey, wait, aren't you the guy on Off Ramp? That was kind of a cool thing. But, the instructors, there was a guy named Chuck Archer. He's still there. A guy named Chuck Archer who's a bass player. I mean, not only did I learn musically from him, but I've told the story before, like, as a 19-year-old kid, I had just gone out and done the Disney All-American College Band in California and had studied with Peter Erskine during that summer and Joe Porcaro and Indugu Chancellor and Greg Field and all these people that I met during that summer, and came back and I think I thought I was a little better than I was, or I sort of just got full of myself a little during that time. And Chuck was the guy who, like, I showed up late to rehearsal one day and was just like, leave. You're useless to me right now. If you can't, you're a pretty good player, but if you can't show up on time, then you might as well just go home.
Wow. Good lesson though, right?
Great lesson.
Yeah.
You realize pretty quickly, my value as a professional is diminished greatly by, not being able to actually show up on time or be prepared, learning the music or showing up with all of the equipment that I need or whatever. You know?
Right. Well, that's being a professional.
Exactly.
It's teaching you to be a professional.
Yeah. And that was, I think, one of my favorite things about Rollins. There was a lot that I learned musically, but professionally, because all of the instructors there were people that were really doing it in town. I see a lot. In fact, this conversation's come up recently with some friends and some people that I know that work at different colleges and stuff. And there are those instructors that you'll meet that are basically stuck in academia. They go through school, they get a degree, maybe they get a second degree or even a third, and then they immediately go back into just teaching. And they've never gone out and been a professional, been in a recording studio and under that pressure or on stage with some artist, or, they've never really had to apply those skills in the real world. And so they kind of live in a little bit of a vacuum. And I think that it does the students a disservice to me, like
Right.
I gained so much from seeing these guys, growing up in Orlando, it was all about Disney. A lot of the musicians, all the best musicians played at Disney, and it was a great gig. It paid well, and it attracted a lot of high quality musicians to Orlando. So, instructors that I had were the people that were playing in the parks, and they were fantastic players who all had advanced degrees, and they were really, really wonderful intellectuals, musical intellectuals, but they were also like out there doing it. And when those guys when you're seeing by example rather than, being told how you should do it, you're seeing it. And that, to me, that was one of the biggest things I think I got from being at Rollins,
Well, that to me seems like that's the reason why places like LA Music Academy and the one in Hollywood, Musicians Institute, are popular with young musicians because all those instructors are guys that are professionals. I work with some of those guys.
Sure. Dave Beyer, right?
Yeah, Dave Beyer, and they're guys that and those jobs, those teaching jobs that they have, they actually encourage them to go out on the road and have a substitute and stuff because they want them to stay current as working musicians, so that when they teach, they're teaching them as a working musician.
Yeah, big time.
Not just a academia guy.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think the other thing that draws younger students to places like MI or Lockham, as it's now called, is the vicinity or the proximity rather to LA. To the scene that this is. When we live in Los Angeles, you're surrounded by. I remember when I first moved here. At some point I realized, maybe it was because I was looking through the union book or something when I first joined the union, and I was like looking through the directory going, wow, who all's in here,
Right.
And I'm seeing like John Robinson and Dave Weckl and Peter Erskine and, Harvey Mason, like these drummers who I've grown up idolizing. I am, even though I'm never going to get called, especially at that point, for the same gigs, but somehow I'm in the same work pool.
True. Yeah.
I'm in the same town as these guys now, and I am now trying to find a way to get work that these guys are already getting. And so when you're in a town like Los Angeles and you're in that kind of company, you're going to learn even in a whole other way. Not only is it just your instructors at school, but the guys that you're surrounded by. Because if you live in Los Angeles, let's say you're at MI, and you want to take a lesson with Peter Erskine, he lives, a half an hour away, and you can go to his house and take a drum lesson. Whereas if you live in Missouri, that's not really going to happen.
It's not.
Not that anything is wrong with Missouri, all you Missourians out there, but
right.
it's just the industry is here.
Yeah.
So, same thing if you were in the film industry, right? Like if you wanted to go to USC as a huge film school, and if you were going to go to USC for film school, not only is it great that you've got great instructors there, but like Steven Spielberg lives down the street.
Yeah, right. And this is where they make most of the films.
Exactly.
Or
exactly.
They start here anyway.
Yeah.
At least contractually, you're going to start here.
Yep. The industry is still here, even though a lot of things have been farmed out. One of the things that's hard right now in the music industry is how much, especially in the film industry, how much is getting farmed out to other countries, other cities. A lot of film scores are done in London now, or even Eastern Europe, Bratislava and Vienna, and Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is budgetary. A lot of that is, interestingly, a lot of those other orchestras have come up to the level that the LA orchestras have always been. I personally think, and I'm probably biased on this, that LA still offers a product in terms of recording. The best studios in the world are still here. And most of the best musicians in the world, especially for studio work, are still here. But London sounds awfully good these days.
Yeah, sure.
And sometimes the financial, it can be better financially for you to go over there and record. We're working on that. There's a lot of discussions about how that needs to progress or change or whatever.
Do you think that the LA musicians have priced themselves out of the market?
Some people might say so. I don't think so. I don't think so, but it's a complicated question. It has to do with, and depending on who you talk to, some people say it has to do with the back end money. Some people say it doesn't. Some people, there's a history lesson, I feel like, in all of this, like how we got where we are now. It used to be that you would charge more up front and there really was no back end. But then at some point it was like, look, can we pay you less up front, but then give you a piece of the movie when it's done? That was agreed to. And I think now musicians feel like, well, wait, we're already not charging as much as we used to up front. And you want to take away the back, the back pay. There are ways around it. It's a little bit of a big machine, I think, that is, at least for me, I mean, I'm in the world and it's hard for me to always understand. I've got contractor friends that I'll call up and be like, hey man, how does this even work?
Yeah, right.
It's just, the whole thing is so complicated. And there are definitely things that need to, and hopefully will change, with the right leadership, whether it be with the musicians union or whatever. Things are going to need to change for it to stay here. Mm-hmm. It's a big thing. It's a big thing.
All right. So we jumped forward a little bit into the professional business, but tell me more about, you're living in Florida.
Yeah.
In college.
Yep.
And then what happened? And then
my college experience, like I said, I was surrounded by the professionals in town. I was really learning a lot about that, but I also started working a lot while I was in school.
Uh-huh.
I was working, probably 5-6 nights a week. I started playing often. There was a band leader in town named Paul Vesco who thankfully hired me a lot. I became kind of a regular member of his. We did a lot of casual stuff, weddings and parties and things like that. But I started working a lot on that. So I was actually able to make some money. And the campus was 15, 20 minutes from my parents' house. So I lived at home, was able to actually put some money away, which was good, Mm-hmm. And I had such a great relationship, continue to have such a great relationship with my family that wasn't weird, to be in my early 20s and still living at home. But what I did find is that I kept sort of longing for, that feels dramatic, longing for,
right.
I wanted more than that. I wanted more than to just be, it was something to be working. It was yet another thing to want to work toward something bigger,
mm-hmm.
or a different type of work. And one of my biggest heroes growing up was Jeff Porcaro.
You and every other drummer in the world.
Exactly. Yeah. And if not, then we should probably have a little sit down and talk about it. But he was sort of the guy that got me interested in being what I knew as a studio drummer. Mm-hmm. I had my heroes. I had the Mel Lewises and the Elvin Jones and the Peter Erskines and the guys that and Tony Williams that I sort of latched on to artistically. And that's not to say that I didn't latch on artistically to Jeff, but Jeff represented this like LA, the ability to walk in, play something beautiful on the first take, and read well. Just the bag of skills that he possessed, in addition to just being such a naturally groovy musician. Like his feel was something that we'll probably never see again. Like that was special. Yeah. He was no doubt special. But the skill, and there was an era of, these LA session guys that they could just come in, put a chart down, read it down. It was perfect. And then they go home, or on to not go home. They'd probably go to 4 more sessions that day.
Go another session.
Yeah. And I was so intrigued by that. And I started spending a lot of time working on my reading. I'm thankful, even actually back to high school, my band director was a guy named Don Schmaus, and he had gone to Eastman and was just a really great trumpet player. I wish I had appreciated him more at the time. He's still with us, and I have told him often since then that I really appreciated it. But, he used to beat us up pretty good on reading, especially the drummers. Like, come on, man, you got to be able to read this. And you're like, oh, you're in high school and you've got an attitude about it.
Right.
But I'm really, really glad now they did, because it's provided me with a whole other professional, like we talked about it before the interview, like the importance of being a reader.
Yeah.
So in college, working on my reading, we sight read a lot in college. That really helped. But when I was getting ready to get out of school, and that influence of Jeff and I should sort of pause on that for a second. When I did that Disney College Band, which was 1997, I spent the summer out there, and it was the first time I had gone away from home to go work. It was work. It was a college program, so it was work within the confines of Disney, but it was work. Right. And I was exposed to, not only now had I idolized Jeff and seen what that was and knew about studio playing, suddenly I was in LA. I was in Anaheim, but would come up to LA. We got to visit a couple of sessions. We went to a, what was the cartoon? Animaniacs. Mm-hmm. With Rick Baptist, was one of our clinicians, and he took us up to this session at Warner Brothers. And I remember sitting there going, oh, okay, this is really scary, but I really want to do this. The pressure was immense. I remember feeling like there's no way in the world I could. Michael Englander was the percussionist, and he now lives kind of between New York and LA, as I understand it. But he's in town a lot to do a lot of different things, and I was so blown away with his ability to read and to interpret these parts, and it would be one dude covering all of the stuff, all of the percussion. It was mind blowing.
Was there a kit player too?
No, not on this. Not on this. Usually, like when I work now and on session stuff like that, I'm usually called in as a drum set player, and then I'll jump out into the section to cover a few extra parts. I'm not the first call orchestra guy in town. There are plenty of other guys that do that. But having the ability to do both helps, plus it's doubles, which pays more.
Yeah. Money.
Yeah. Anyway, so going to that session and going, okay, studio playing is a thing. I really want to do this. But I started studying that summer with Peter Erskine, and that relationship with Peter has turned into literally a lifelong friendship, mentorship. Like I have learned more from that guy than most anybody other than probably my family that I can think of. To the point where like he played at my wedding, mm-hmm. he was at my 40th birthday party. Like we're family, I think, and I appreciate everything he's done for me. Even when it's like literally getting your ass kicked by him, because I have many times. But that relationship, I was able to, between the seeing it, being in Los Angeles and seeing it, and then really forging this relationship with Peter, who was here and who had done so much studio work, it started to inform me as to how I was going to move my career forward, what I was really going to do. So as soon as I was done at Rollins, it took me one extra semester to finish. And so I finished in December of 1999. And January 19th of 2000, I was living in Los Angeles. Like weeks. I was like, get me out of here.
Now, your college education, did you get a degree in music from there?
I did. And my undergrad degree is from Rollins, and it's just a music major. Uh-huh. The way that the system was structured there, you didn't have a jazz major versus a class. It was just, you were just a music major.
I see. I
played in all the jazz ensembles. I played in all the marimba ensembles and the percussion ensembles and the orchestra, and I did all that stuff. Excuse me. So I did all that, but it was very much sort of all-inclusive experience musically. I moved to LA. I started working, actually doing a little bit of your world. When I first moved here, I had one gig that was every Saturday night. This guy, Michael Andrew, who lives in Orlando, but was living out here at the time, hired me to play in his band at Merv Griffin's club in the Beverly Hilton, called the Coconut Club. The mm-hmm. Coconut Club. The Cotton Club, I almost said, but that's the place in Japan.
Yeah.
he hired me to do that. We played there every Saturday night, and that essentially paid my rent. That one gig didn't pay for much else, but it pretty much covered my rent. And at the time, I was actually living with my little sister, who was out here for dance. We shared a studio apartment. That was uncomfortable at times, when you might have a girlfriend or whatever. And hey,
Sure.
Katie, can you be doing something other than be here tonight?
Put the sock on the doorknob on the
exactly. So I came out here. I had that one gig, but then in an effort to try to keep my head above water, I started engineering at a studio in Hollywood. Never shall I be at the level of a Ross Pallone or a Clark Germain or anybody like that, but I did develop chops enough to understand mixing and understand the production side of things even more,
Which is probably helpful when you're working as a musician and you're recording in the studio. You know what they're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what they're talking about. And this is something I've actually heard Matt Chamberlain talk about a lot too. When you understand the mechanics of a microphone and of the room and what it means to when you start to really light up the room with the volume levels or anything, you will be a better recorded drummer. First of all, you make the engineer's job easier, which they will appreciate.
Yeah.
And secondly, what you try to portray, what you try to execute musically will come out better.
Right.
It'll sound better. You understand that, this mic is going to respond in this way, and I need to perform it this way so that you get the right kind of sound or performance or whatever. It really does make a difference. And the other thing it makes a difference for me is as a producer, which has been something I've started to do more and more in the last, say, like 5 or 6 years. And it gives me the ability to record myself, I do a lot of drum tracking at home in my own studio for people. And it also gives me the ability to, as a producer, know what I'm trying to ask for. Let's say I'm, just recently I was producing a thing at Capitol, and I'm able to say to an engineer, like either it's one of the house engineers or I think this last thing Clark was on it, which seldom would I ever have to really ask Clark for something that he's not going to know what to do, but I can more articulately convey what it is that I'm looking for because I understand how the equipment works. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that the more knowledge you've got from that standpoint, the better.
Yeah, of course. I believe that too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Definitely.
even with you when we've been on the road live.
Yeah.
I can convey something, or you can convey something to me musically, but be able to put it in technical terms, and I go, oh, okay, because this is doing this and that. Okay, cool. I'll play this differently.
Yeah, and you're always really good about that, because when you walk into the room and you hear the stage, you automatically know, well, should I use these lighter sticks, or should I play lighter, or should I play louder, or whatever? And you base that on the environment.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing in the recording studio.
For sure. Absolutely.
It's all about the environment and how you're going to play.
And the style of the music, and there are a lot of things, obviously, that inform all of that. But so getting some experience with recording and working, and it helped put food on the table, but it also was one of those things that you learn from, and then you go, wow, okay, I can really use this in a lot of aspects of
a whole lot better than waiting tables or something like that.
Tell me about
so you're still working in the business and in the business that you want to be in.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good. Yeah, great.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good thing.
I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, well, see, learn something new every day. What was interesting though, so while I was doing that, if I rewind to the college band, they had 2 drum set players in the college band. It was myself, and the other guy was a guy named Chris Steele, who is still here in town, plays great. He's been touring a lot. I'm trying to remember who it was that he was on the road with. I'll think of it later, maybe, and remind everybody. But Chris Steele, wonderful drummer. He was doing his master's at USC. And he called me up one day and said, hey, man, I've got to miss rehearsal this blah, blah, blah day. Can you cover me? So I went in to sub for the rehearsal, and Chris was just about finished with his master's at that point. It was like in his last semester. So he was leaving. And I went in to sub, and afterward, I had a great time. It was the first time I'd played in that type of big band music for a while. I had been doing Michael Andrews' gig, which is great, but it was very sort of Sinatra, swing, that kind of world. And this was going in to play more sort of artistically inspired music. You know, I don't want to say avant-garde because it wasn't like crazy weird, but it was different. It's a different style of playing. Mm-hmm. So I went into sub, had a great time, and afterwards, the director of the of the jazz department, who's a guy named Shelley Berg, said, "Hey, listen, you know, Chris is about to finish his degree. Do you want to do a degree? Would you be interested in doing a master's?" And I said, "Not really, thanks though." And he said, "Well, are you sure? Because you'd be a TA, and so you would get a stipend." And you get a stipend, you would get health benefits for the 2 years that you're there, and the degree is paid for. And I thought, boy,
that's kind of hard to turn down, isn't it?
It's kind of hard to turn down.
Yeah.
And yet, for some reason, I did. I still said no. I was so committed to, I was going to move to LA and start my career, and I don't want to go back to school. Right. Mm-hmm. So maybe an hour later or something, hour or two later, I get a call from Erskine, who is now teaching at USC at that point, right? He had just started, you know, essentially running the drum department at that point. And he said, "I heard Shelley offered you the TA gig." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I heard you turned it down." I said, "Yeah, I don't really want to go back to school." He goes, "Call him back and say yes."
Oh, wow.
So I, you know, as is most of the time when I have any interaction like that with Peter, he's not been wrong yet. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
You know, in let's see, 20 years of studying with him, he's not once been wrong. So I said, okay, fine. So I called Shelley back, and I did 2 years at USC. And of course, it was just some of the best. It was one of the best choices I could have made. Not only did I learn a lot, much the same way I did at Rollins. I mean, you're gaining a lot of knowledge, but because, just like Rollins, everyone on faculty there was heavily involved in the scene. You know, it's Peter, or it was Ndugu, who, you know, we just lost a few weeks ago. Yeah. It was Shelley, who was heavily involved in the scene. Greg Field, heavily involved in the scene. Patrice Rushen was around there. Alan Pasqua, like just so many people that were heavy musicians who were out there doing it. Not just a teacher on a campus, you know. And so I gained a ton from that, but I also made a lot of great friends that, you know, I think about the guys that were in the big band with me at USC, like Gerald Clayton, who is blowing up New York City right now. And I mean that in a good way. That sounds really wrong. Yeah. He's you know, Taylor Eichste, also piano player, who is taking over the world in his own way. Justin Ray, who is on the road with Michael Bublé all the time. I mean, there were just so many great young musicians who, Alan Chang was in the big band with me, who is Bublé's music director. Just a ton of unbelievably talented musicians. And I got to spend 2 years playing with these guys and getting my butt kicked, you know, by guys who were a lot better than me. Mm-hmm. So that was a super positive experience. So I once again thank Peter for being right about that one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that seems like the right decision.
It was the right decision.
Even though, now would you say, forget about the experience that you got there, the learning experience, but would you say that because you had that master's, it made any difference in your career?
That's a tough question to answer.
People don't usually ask a musician, what degrees do you have? They just want to know how good you are.
You're absolutely right. And so from a performance standpoint, out in the real world of music, nobody cares. Mm-hmm. However, as I am getting a little older, you know, I've just turned 40, and I do think about, and it's so funny because you just go, ugh, I love these, and yet I roll my eyes because it's like, why does everybody always have to be right about this stuff? My father, who is one of the most thoughtful people I know and informed people I know, and he would always say to me, he was like, you should get that degree because someday you might want to teach. And I was like, I'm not going to teach. I don't want to teach. I want to play the drums. I'm not interested in I when I was a kid, I used to think it meant that it was like putting you out to pasture, you know?
Right.
And now that, my wife and I are embarking upon this journey of becoming foster parents, and we're like, hopefully within the near future, adopt a child and become parents ourselves. I see the value from two sides. For one, it means that there's a steady work situation at home, and not having to be on the road to do.
Mm-hmm.
Two, and this is, I think, more important, and it's the more sort of aware aspect of this discussion. I understand what it means now to be able to impart knowledge upon somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about a paycheck. It's not about being put out to pasture. Like, now that I've lived enough, and I'm by no means, there are a lot of guys out there that are older than me that have been doing it longer, and I got that. But from my perspective, the artists that I've played with and the places around the world I've seen and the musical situations I've wound up in, I actually think I have something to offer now, whereas when I was 25 years old, I didn't have anything to offer yet. All I wanted to do was play the drums. And I think that's probably right. I needed to go out and live all of this stuff before it was going to make any sense for me to think about teaching somebody. I get more enjoyment out of having a student come over to my house now than I ever did before, because I think musically I've got something to say. Experientially, I've got something to say, even if it's just understanding what it means to, like we were saying earlier, like to get on a plane, fly to Russia, play one gig, and fly back. That's an experience that, like, I can tell people about now. I can and somehow be able to relate to someone that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So I do not currently have a teaching gig. I have not. I haven't gone down that road.
But you could.
I could
at some point if you want to. Right?
Yeah.
So it's options.
Yes.
It's more options in your life, and who knows? You may.
I may.
You may want to. What if you get older and you develop arthritis in your hands or something, and you can't go out and be the badass drummer that you are now?
Well, thank you for that.
But you could still teach somebody,
of course. Of course.
So that's all good.
And the concept of making yourself as hireable as possible has permeated a lot of aspects of my career. What I never wanted to do was become a jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. But I do want to make myself as versatile as possible, as hireable as possible. Like, you need a guy who can play a pop groove, you can call me. You need a guy who can play big band music and read it really well, you can call me. You need, whatever. For example, I leave Sunday for New York. The guy who's not touring anymore. I'm going to New York for 2 weeks, but this one's a little different. We're doing on NBC. We're doing Jesus Christ Superstar Live with John Legend and Sarah Bareilles. And so on that gig, I have to be like super rock guy for a certain percentage of the show. I have to be music theater guy to a certain extent, even though it's a rock opera. It's not really like a theater show, but it kind of is. There's a lot of like understanding how to follow a conductor and understanding how to read this stuff, play along with a click. A lot of the shows to click. There's a lot involved in that. And because I can do and I feel comfortable in all those situations, I can walk in, and this gig is a really fun week, like a really, really cool way to spend time. So, the more hireable you make yourself, the more you open yourself up for a gig like that.
Yeah.
Being versatile. And so to your point about the master's degree, or whether that, affected me, I mean, it made me more hireable.
Yeah.
It definitely made me more hireable.
And you can't discount the education that you got while you were there. I'm sure it made you a better reader. I'm sure it made you a better player. And the relationships that you made with all those other musicians who are now the pros.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with knowing people in this business, that's for sure.
That is indeed for sure. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So now you're in California. You're doing engineering gig. Thanks for stealing work from me.
Trust me, they were calling you before they were calling me. Believe that.
And then what happened? So you're doing this, and you're playing one night a week. That's not good enough, right?
No, not good enough. And I actually sort of phased that out while I was in my master's. Started working a little bit with different people. I wasn't working as much as I wanted to, but again, it's like you're in school, and I was in that mode. So, funny story. So I got through my 2 years. We were doing our last concert with the USC Big Band, and it was at the old Catalina Bar and Grill before it moved to its new location. So it was over there on Cahuenga. And I remember this very distinctly. Like, it was traffic, and I was running really late, and it was the last gig, and I kind of had like a weird attitude about being there. And I can remember sort of the feeling of being, like, why am I having to do this? And I'm carting my damn drums into this thing, and the parking's bad, and I think I might have gotten a parking ticket that night or so. It was just like, it was like one of those nights where you're just like,
the worst thing about being a drummer is when you got to carry your own gear.
Oh, tell me about it. That's why I'm so thankful for cartage.
Right.
So I'm carting my stuff in there, and I'm in this weird mood, and I set up all my crap, and I'm running late, and I sit down to play the first tune, and in walks Louis Bellson, and he sits right in front of me.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh God. Okay. Why tonight?
Had you met him before?
Nope.
Okay.
But according to him, what he said to me afterwards, and he, what I found out much later is that he always had a relationship with the different drummers that came through SC for the most part. This was very near the end of his life, so he wasn't around as much as he had been for guys previous, but he had heard about me at USC and had that relationship with USC, so he wanted to come hear me before I got out of school. So he came to this show. I was completely nervous now at this point. I've got to go play big band music in front of one of the fathers of, modern big band drumming. Yeah. And then in walks Horace Silver, and he goes and sits in the back of the room. And I'm like, okay, so now I've got one of the jazz messengers here now too. And just a living legend of jazz who happens to live in LA. And then shortly thereafter, David Benoit comes in, and he sits down over by the pianists. And he had come to he had known Taylor Eichstee since he was a little kid. And he had come to hear Taylor play. And after the gig was done, I kind of just put my head down and tried to focus and not mess it up in front of Louis. We were having, as Peter called it, a Louis moment. I'm glad you had your Louis moment. We were taking photos, and he signed a cymbal for me, which I've still got. And it was a really nice, like, Louis Bellson thing. We wrapped that up, and he and his wife were leaving, and David walked up to me. And he was like, hey, man, I didn't want to interrupt. I saw that was Louis, and it was the whole thing. But I thought you sounded really great. Do you have a card? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I give him my card. And sure enough, I don't know, maybe 2 months later or something like that summer, Jeff Olson, who had been David's drummer for a very, very long time, hurt his shoulder and had to go in for surgery. Wasn't going to be able to play for a little bit. So David asked me if I would want to go on the road for that summer. And I did, and I had a blast. And it was the first time it was the first real road situation. I had flown out to a couple of gigs kind of thing, but like go on the road and you're traveling as part of an artist's band, and learning all their music and just that whole experience. And it was Andy Suzuki and Dean Taba and myself and David, and the four of us went out for this tour for the whole summer. In and out. We would go out for a couple of weeks or something, then come back for a few days, and then go back out. And David was working a lot at that point. And I was like, okay, I'm sold. This is awesome. I'm making good money. I'm playing fun music with really good musicians. Sign me up. Mm-hmm. And so I did the summer. And then David called me up and said, hey, listen, I'm doing a Christmas tour this year. And it's with Al Jarreau and Melissa Manchester. Are you interested? I have loved Al Jarreau since I was like 12 years old. I've listened to every record. Jane Monheit, who's a dear friend who you know a little bit too.
Yeah.
She and we will sit in her kitchen while, having an adult beverage and making dinner, just singing all of the scat solos together on Al Jarreau records, like we're total nerds for this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he was like, Al's doing it, do you want to do it? I was like, are you kidding me? And then somebody else called and they told me what it was going to pay. And I was like, really? Like, that's a lot. Yes, please. Like, I was thinking I was going to have to pay you to go on the road with Al Jarreau, So I went out for that tour and, David and I just really hit it off. We became friends in addition to, musical partners at that point, playing a lot of his music together. And it turned into 14 years I toured with him.
Yeah.
And have only recently, since I've made changes and not really touring as much as I used to, I toured with him solid through that whole time.
Yeah.
And that was like the first, okay, now I'm a working Los Angeles musician, so to speak.
Yeah, you're in the list. You're on the list. Yeah.
I'm on the list. Shortly thereafter, Mindy Abair, who I had actually known since I was a baby. Her father and my father played in a band together before either of us were born. So I've known Mindy since birth. She, I guess, had heard that I was playing with David and was struggling with a drummer issue and said, would you come in to do these dates? I said, sure. Learned all the music, showed up. I'll never, and if there happened to be a younger drummer listening to this right now, here's a great example of professionalism. Not that I'm, the end all be all on this, but it was a sort of an interesting moment. I backwards and forwards learned all of her stuff before we showed up to the first rehearsal. And we played the first song, come to the end of the song, play the last note, cut it off. And she looked at me with these big wide eyes, and the guitar player, this guy, Fred Clark, comes running across the rehearsal studio and hugs me.
Wow.
And I was like, what just happened? He's like, thank you. Somebody finally learned this stuff, And
Wow.
they had been struggling with guys who would come in and just sort of not really give it its due.
Not prepared.
They didn't prepare. They didn't, it was like they didn't really value it was like, yeah, whatever. It's just a gig. And that is never, ever going to work. You can't, I don't care what gig it is. I don't care what gig it is. You prepare. Even if it's a $25 casual and you need to learn 5 or 6 tunes for it, fine. Learn the tunes. Because if you don't, if you may feel like the dollar per hour ratio starts to drop in those moments.
It goes down, of course, and you spend more time, yeah.
But dig, if you show up and you've got your what together, I'm allowed to cuss, right?
You got your shit together.
Yeah, you got your shit together. People will respect that, and then somebody's going to recommend you for the better gig that does pay better.
Exactly.
But conversely, if you show up and you don't have it together, then the reputation will... Bad news travels faster than good news.
And what if just by chance somebody's in the audience that may have hired you and now they see you blow it?
Nope.
They're not going to hire you.
They're not going to hire you.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like...
And people
always.
talk. Of course,
people talk.
Everybody in this business talks about this guy and that guy, and
yep.
You want to be on that positive side of the talking,
Always.
not the negative side.
Always. Inevitably, someone will...
2 lessons now.
Yes.
Be prepared.
Yep.
And be on time.
Be on time. Oh, man. My band director in high school used to say, if you're on time, you're late.
Yeah, right. You're either early or late. You're never on time.
There's no such thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I depending on the gig, it varies how early I will be, but I am always early. Mm-hmm. We were working at Sony just I guess maybe 2 weeks ago, and I think I was there an hour and a half early for 2 reasons. One, it's Sony in Culver City, and that's far. I live on the east side of town, and Sony is in traffic, really hard to get to. So I don't want to chance anything. Like, something goes wrong in traffic, I am not going to be the guy who comes running in at the downbeat.
Yeah.
But secondly, I want people to see that I care. You show up, you got all your stuff, you got everything together. It's important. I've had my moments of like near misses with that stuff. I recall. This was a good one. We were working on a TV show. What's it called? Agent Carter. It was on ABC, I think. And I had 2 bags of cymbals with me. I had cartage that day, so the drums were already there, but I had 2 big old heavy bags of cymbals that I was going to bring in from the car, the stuff that I had at home. And I took one of the bags. I was like, I'm not going to be able to carry both these bags. They're too heavy, and it's a long way to the studio from the parking garage at Warner's. So I grabbed one of the bags, walked through security, go back to the sound stage, drop one off, and I'm about to go back and get the other one. And they're like, oh, hey, Jamey, can you come over and look at these parts real quick? And, hey, I need you to sign this form, and blah. And next thing you know, it's like downbeats in like 5 minutes. I don't have time to go get that other bag. I'm sure it's fine. I've got plenty of cymbals here. It won't be a problem. Very first cue, I play the cue, and then the composer comes on and he's like, hey, Jamey, can you play a sizzle cymbal on that, please? Sure, no problem. And I open up the bag to find the 5 sizzle cymbals I had with me that day. All of them were in the other bag.
Oh, no.
So I had to go running out into the percussion section. And I looked at this guy, Wade Colbreth, who's one of the premier percussionists in town. I'm like, Wade, do you have a sizzle cymbal? He's like, yes. And he hands me a sizzle cymbal that was in his case. Saved my butt that day. But, you know, it's the being prepared too, right?
Yeah.
Like if I hadn't been able to get rescued on that very moment, that composer might never call me again because I just wasn't.
You didn't have
I didn't have what he needed.
Yeah.
You know? You just never know. That's a big lesson you'll learn real fast.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, so Mindy Abair.
Yeah.
You did the first gig with her, and then you kept working with her for
I
a while.
did.
Right?
Boy, that was another long one. I worked with her for 12 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. She is, since, you know, she's restructured and's got a kind of a different direction she's gone. But yeah, we worked together for a very, very, very long time. And during that whole time between Mindy and David and then a few other artists, I worked with Jeff Lorber a little bit during that time. And I worked with Jeff Golub quite a bit during that time. And I was kind of in this world of touring, and it was like sort of the smooth jazz sort of fusion world. Mm-hmm. And I was always on the road, just always. I mean, there were months that would go by that I might see my wife twice, you know. And it was really starting to beat me up. You know, I didn't want to just be the road guy anymore. In fact, I had moved to LA because I wanted to be a studio guy. You know, That was sort of the whole reason I mean, not the whole reason, but I had a choice when I got out of school. It's like, am I moving to LA or New York or Nashville? And LA seemed the right place. You know, I had my teacher here. I had Peter here. So I felt like I wasn't really taking advantage of being in LA and doing the studio thing like I wanted to do. And, you know, we started having all these conversations about being parents. You know, my wife and I, we've been married. We're coming up on our 10-year anniversary in a couple of months. And for the last, 7 of that, we've been, trying to have kids. And it's not really, that part of things hasn't gone the way that we wanted it to. But in anticipation of us either having that happen or adopting or whatever, over the last few years, I've kept saying, like, I got to find ways to not just be on the road all the time. I don't want to be, the father of a toddler that sees his dad, once a month or twice a month or something like that, So I have kind of started to make some changes, and it's not necessarily been easy all the time. Suddenly you have a week or two or whatever where you don't have a whole lot of work and it feels weird. But it's been a positive thing overall. I've sort of opened myself up to other work, other types of work. During that time, I started writing more. I've really gotten into big band arranging more. I used to do it, you had to do it when you were in college. It was never something I felt super drawn to, but now I've been writing I've written a few things for Jane Monheit. I've written a few things for Lucy Woodward, who sings with Snarky Puppy. I've been playing in her band a bit over the last, actually a lot over the last couple of years. And she and Jane have been doing this big band thing together where they, like 2 singers with the big band and they trade off. And so I've written some charts for that along with this guy, Dave Richards, who's a fantastic arranger. And you realize, like, okay, no, he's the arranger and I'm the drummer who arranges. You know what I mean? But I'm getting better at it and I'm working on that a lot. I've been music directing a lot of things, conducting stuff. I conduct the the Spotlight Awards, which is at Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. Well, it used to be Dorothy Chandler. Now it's at Disney Hall.
Right.
And we worked together.
I worked with you on that.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And that was back at Dorothy Chandler. Now that we do it at Disney Hall, they just use all the in-house people, which is why we don't get to work
because
together
you can't control the music in there anyway. You can't
so
control
intense.
the sound is just whatever it is.
It's just what it is.
Yeah,
it's for sure. But so sort of falling into this other pace, this other type of work, this other it's been an extremely positive thing, even though at times it's nerve-wracking, but it's been a good choice overall.
Yeah. Well, when you were in college, the music industry, for records, was still going strong.
Yeah, big
and
time.
people like Peter Erskine and all those other drummers and musicians that you mentioned, they were all working and making plenty of money in the studio.
Yeah.
But now that's just not a thing. It's mostly for TV and not even that much for TV, but mostly for feature films.
Yeah, feature films, and like we said earlier, the feature film thing has even changed because of the ability to record well in so many other places where wages are different.
Yeah.
We run into a problem with that. That's sort of a global issue, right? Like it's not even just the music industry. It's like, things being made in other countries because it's just cheaper to make it over there. The wages are different. You know?
Right.
But what has been my, people have asked, I don't know if that's so much a question, but like the subject of that, people ask me about a lot. Like if you're a younger musician and you're going to try to create a career in this modern music industry, because yes, it is vastly different. And in a lot of ways it sucks, compared to what it used to be.
What it used to be, yeah.
I mean, it used to be that the A-list players, the John Robinsons or the Jeff Porcaros or the Carlos Vegas or these guys were playing 4-5 sessions a day and then go play a gig at night. And then
they wouldn't even have thought about going on the road.
No, not in a million years.
Yeah.
Because the money was just too good staying in town.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
they couldn't. They were just, this, and then the stuff that would fall off the plate onto the B-list players was keeping them incredibly busy. And even the like sort of next calls, like the third call on the list was still just working a ton. Fourth call probably still too,
Yeah.
Like these guys were, the bench was deep of guys that were working all the time. And now the A-list players still work a lot, but not as much as they used to. The B-list players, you're lucky if you're getting called for, a session or two a month. In fact, I just had this discussion so I keep my drums with a company called Angel City Drumworks, a guy named John Oreshnik. He's a sweetheart. And he's been around this industry for a long time, and he has a lot of the big guys in town. Erskine keeps his drums there. John Robinson does. Who else? Victor Andrizzo keeps his drums there. Guys that are working a ton. And he's like, man, I remember when so much of our business was just the storage didn't really even mean anything. We wouldn't even charge people for storage because we were carting so much. Mm-hmm. Now there's so much less cartage that we actually have to start thinking about charging for the storage.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Because
it's like most guys the drums just sit there and then they go out a few times a month.
Yeah.
If you've got 4, what did he say? 3 or 4 sessions a month, you're doing pretty well.
Wow. That used to be in a day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you've got 3 or 4 round trip cartages in a month, you're doing pretty well. Mm-hmm. Now it's also changed because so much recording gets done at home. So it's not to say that these guys aren't working, like myself included. Like I do a lot of recording at home now, just because it's more cost effective for the producers and for,
and the budgets aren't as big.
They
can't
aren't.
afford to spend, I don't even know what cartage is now, $500-600 to a studio and back. Mm-hmm. That's just the cartage. Mm-hmm. And then to pay you and pay the studio.
Pay the studio, pay the engineer,
So why not just say, hey, Jamey, I'm gonna email you over this track, play on it, and
I'll
send it back
to
me.
Yeah.
and then, it's way, way cheaper.
Yep.
Yeah.
Way cheaper. And the other nice thing about if you're me in those situations, I get to sort of dictate my schedule a little bit more. Mm-hmm. They say, hey man, here's like Chris. I work for Chris Wallen a lot at home, and he'll send me a track and he'll say, hey, do you have time to put drums on this? Yes. When do you need it? 2 days. Great. So sometime within the next 2 days, I make time to go down and do that thing, and it's done. Usually I just go ahead and do it the day that they send it. But if it happens that I've got something else at that very moment, they're not having to scramble to try to find another studio or a different drummer or this or that or whatever, or moves. They just go sometime in the next couple of days, whatever you can do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's been really good. It's made it so that investing money into my space, whether it be gear or room, tuning the room and trying to make it sound good, even though I have a very small space, but I've made it so that I can get a really good drum sound out of there, and it's wound up on a lot of records,
I think every drummer that I know does that.
Yeah.
And I know several.
Yeah.
They all have a room at home.
At some point you have to.
Yeah, you have to do it.
It just makes financial sense, both for me, but those composers and especially like film and TV composers. Mm-hmm. The budgets aren't what they used to be, and so I'll get a call and be like, "Hey, man, we're recording strings at Sony or Fox or something, but can we just do the rhythm section at your place?" Sure, that's fine. And then so they'll do the rhythm section first, and then they'll go track strings in a big room, but they just don't have the budget for cartage or for another day of studio or for this or that. They just
Yeah. Well, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like it, when people send mixes for me to do here, and I'm sure you like it because you, like you said, you can have more control over your own schedule, and you can do it at your convenience within reason.
Within reason. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Here we are in your studio, and if you want to go make a cup of coffee, it's right there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm going to take a break and go make a cup of coffee for a minute.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to take a break and go check my mail. Whatever. You're not under the gun.
Not tied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a deadline, but you could choose, let's say you've got a busy day, you could choose to work from 10 till 2 in the morning or something.
Yeah. Sure.
Instead of having to work in the middle of the day.
So that's the one nice thing about this.
Yes. It's sort of a drag when you see budgets go down and you see what some people are offering to pay you for what used to be XYZ is known more like X.
Just the X.
Yeah. But it's that's why, and I think this was where I was going with this. Sorry if I did a little tangent with this, but
it's all right.
The higher ability, the more things you can do. That's why I've tried to do that even beyond just the drumming part. I can write a big band arrangement for somebody and I get paid for that. I can produce somebody's record and I can get paid for that. I can do a drum track for somebody, which is what I've always done, but I've added more things to what it is that I'm able to do. And it's made it so that even in rough times, like when there's just not as much drumming work, there are other things that I'm doing. I think it's important now for us to be able to do that. Just diversify, just like you would with a stock portfolio. You're going to just keep it diverse, because if one thing starts to sag, something else might go up, and then you're going to be, that much more set to keep your head above water.
Yeah, and that would go for not only drummers, but all musicians, anybody that wants to work in this business. It's important to have more than one income stream.
Yeah.
You can't just do it with one thing.
Yep. There are some that can. There are a few that can, but they are very few and far between. They are guys that are known for a certain thing, and it's something everybody wants, and they can go do it, and that's cool. Like, I got that. I can think of a few guys in town that it's like, but you know what? Even those guys, they're running a studio, or they're, They've put themselves in positions where money's coming from multiple angles. Mm-hmm. I think one of the greatest examples of that was Ndugu, man. Like, this is a guy who played on Billie Jean and, PYT and all these, classics. But he also wrote music. He was teaching at USC. I mean, he understood the idea of diversification, keeping as many, you want to be good at all of it, but you got to put yourself out there in as many different ways as possible so that you can maintain a way of living that is comfortable for you. Mm-hmm. He was amazing at that. And all the while being a great human being that, we will sort of.
Yeah, I got the fortunate fortunate that I did get to work with him on a session one time.
Yeah,
and met him, and he was a wonderful guy.
Just a great guy. That was a tough blow, man. I don't think
Wasn't
any of us
that old,
were
really.
No,
yeah,
no, not even close.
Yeah.
Just what are you gonna do? We were at his memorial the last week, or was it Monday of this week? I don't remember. I feel like it was a week ago. And man, you just the turnout and the what people had to say. It was just so universal across the board.
Mm-hmm.
The smile and the happiness that this guy exuded, but also just like he was tough in the good way. Peter is that way. Peter is tough in a very good way. He's always been tough with me, and I've always appreciated it because it's like, the tough love thing is, I think, somewhat lost a little bit now. You
get sued.
I didn't say it was a backhand. I just said, but
he talked nasty to me.
Exactly.
He was mean to me.
He was mean. I mean, there are some things. Even I've actually recalled some stories with Peter to him, and he's said, "Wow, I said that to you." But I mean, all of it is it's tough love, and if you don't have a thick enough skin in this music industry, it's gonna hurt.
Yeah,
it's gonna hurt.
Now, we mentioned you've mentioned going on the road with David Benoit and Mindy Abair. Mm-hmm. How about some other? You did some work with David Foster, right?
Yeah. I've done a few things for David. I did it was sort of interesting. He did a musical. He wrote a musical with, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he developed primal scream therapy, like the psychotherapy.
Oh, okay.
Where you like relive some traumatic event and you scream it out, kind of thing. He was the developer of primal scream therapy, and they wrote a musical together about primal scream, and it was called Primal Scream. And so I played on that. We did a whole bunch of rehearsals. It was actually a really interesting show and a really interesting cast. I take a lot of fond memories from that. The music director, Catherine Lounsbury, is still, I think, my favorite music director I've gotten to work for in a music theater type setting. She's incredible. But I've also done some recording for him, and most of it, interestingly, is stuff that's at home. Records. What was the last? It's been a second since I've done one, but I did. We did the Jordan Sparks. Was that his name? Jordan something. He was on The Voice,
Idol
I
or something.
think. Yeah, or The Voice. Jordan Smith. Not Jordan Sparks. That's the girl. I don't remember the guy's name.
Okay, well,
it was, and because Chris Walden does a lot of work for David.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just demos. Sometimes it's something that ends up on a record, but a lot of it I just do at home. Mm-hmm. David's an interesting guy, man. He's hilarious, but also kind of serious. He's very like direct. He's sort of that same thing. It's like, I like when it doesn't mean that you have to be mean, but direct, and you know what you're looking for, and you're able to convey what you're looking for in a efficient manner, and that to me is David Foster. Mm-hmm. And he likes modulations a lot. He even made the joke that he was like, we were in rehearsals for that show, and he was like, why don't we put a modulation here? And somebody kind of looked at him, but he goes, "Hey man, I've made a living off of doing that. Come on."
That's right. Yeah. Okay. And if memory serves me right, weren't you on a tour that guys did a bunch of rehearsals, and then you were supposed to go out for like a really long time, and then it got canceled at the last moment? Was that with David Foster?
No, that was not. That was Andrew Lloyd Webber, and it was what I'm doing in New York next week.
Oh.
Except, and I think that's
because I remember that was kind of disastrous for you.
Oh God, that was not fun. So we were doing Jesus Christ Superstar Arena tour. We were like, Madison Square Garden and Staples Center, and we were going to be out for months. And it's interesting. It's sort of, there's like the pre-superstar and post-superstar in my life. because that moment when that tour fell apart, I had at that point left Mindy's gig. I had left most other things.
You had to tell everybody that you're not going to be available for months, right?
Months. I cleared my schedule because they were also talking about extensions down into South America, and it was going to amount to like 4 months. And I thought, okay, cool. This is going to be a different thing. I'm going to probably move away from some of the touring I had been doing. I'm going to go into this, and then after this, it will likely open up some other stuff. And this is going to be like a big life change to go out and do this thing and to work with Andrew and his crew and Nigel Wright, who is his music director. And I was excited about all of that. And literally 3 days before we left to go to New Orleans, which is where we were going to rehearse for a week or two or something like that, and then be on the road, they canceled the whole thing. My drums were in trunks on their way to New Orleans. They were gone. It took me forever to get those back and even find out where they were. It was like rats scurried, not rats. That sounds mean. None of these people were rats, but it was like this thing went and then everybody just went, pew, and you were like, hey, you guys have all my drums,
right?
Are we going to get paid anything? Cause I've cleared everything. And to their credit, Andrew's company, the Really Useful Group, did the right thing. They didn't have to because they were not contractually obligated to take care of us, but they did and a little bit. But it was
you didn't make all the money.
Oh, I mean,
but you got something.
Not even a week's worth of pay, but it was like they gave us something that said, "Look, we're really, really sorry. We don't understand what happened with this promoter." It wasn't incumbent upon them to take care of us, but they did throw us something.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was the right thing to do.
It was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so to their credit, I felt like, Andrew and his company did the right thing. I could say, I can't say the same thing for the promoter, who I will remain nameless at this point, but if you want to look it up on any of the news stories, you'll know exactly who it is. He handled it poorly and a lot of music. It wasn't just me. I mean, this was actually maybe the hardest part of that whole thing. I had gotten so many of my friends involved in that, because I knew Nigel, who is the music director and who is supervising the music for this television show. And he was the one who called me about this too. But I knew him from working on X Factor, the TV show X Factor. And when this tour came up, he goes, listen, there's a tour. Do you want to do it? By the way, who do you want to get on bass? Who do you want to get on guitar? Who do you want to get on percussion? And I was like, oh, great, man. I get to get all my friends on this gig. Uh-huh. So I gave him all these phone numbers, all these people that I know and love that are truly some of my closest friends, all got hired. They all cleared their schedules too. And we all got screwed.
Yeah. What a disaster.
Oh man. It was so, I think of myself as a reasonably, emotionally well-adjusted person, somebody and I can rebound from crap.
Yeah.
That one took a minute, and it was really hard to figure out what to do, like who to be, how to be, what, I'm calling my friends and I feel responsible for the fact that I had gotten them on this thing and then it fell apart. But I mean, obviously it's not my fault, but you go through this whole range of emotions, but here's the, that was 5 years ago or something like that. That was about the time where I was like, I'm not going to go on the road anymore. It took me a while to actually execute that plan because I kept continuing to do Benoit's touring and his Christmas tours, which is where you and I would spend a lot of time together. But it was definitely this is not going to be it forever for me. And I don't want to. I remember being in the shower where, most of us have really important thoughts.
Deep thoughts.
Right? Deep thoughts.
Yeah.
I remember being in the shower thinking, I don't want anyone else to control my destiny anymore. I want to find ways that I can do it myself. So writing has been a big one. I have a good, very dear friend named Matt Kaczynski, and he and I do a lot of writing together now. Television stuff, things for ABC TV. And if you guys hear the bumper that goes I'm not going to try and sing it for you because
Please.
that would be terrible. You don't want all of your subscribers will go away.
Yeah.
But there's a vocal bumper thing that happens between all of the primetime shows on ABC, and he and I wrote that. And so, this is a different kind of controlling your own destiny in terms of financially.
That's mailbox money, right?
That's mailbox money, and the residual. Well, the work builds on itself. At that point, you start putting your eggs in these different baskets. Those baskets start to fill up. And then now I can sort of choose when I feel like I want to go on the road instead of feeling like every call.
Well, yeah, if it's something good that pays well and it fits within the parameters of what you want to do.
Yeah. Well, like going to New York for this 2 weeks. Yeah, I'm taking that.
Yeah, that sounds like
you
a
want
really
me to go
fun,
spend 2 weeks
cool gig.
playing with John Legend and Sarah Bareilles? Yes, I will do that. But do I want to go to, middle of the country to play one jazz festival for not enough money? I don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
And that's not to sound snooty. Like, those gigs are valuable gigs, but I've done enough of it, and I feel like I'm trying to move to a different aspect of my career. Mm-hmm. So that's where I am now.
Well, let the younger guys come in and do that, right?
Yep.
It gives an opportunity for somebody else to make a living and to get some experience.
Yep.
Not a bad thing.
Especially in a town like this where there are a lot of young, very talented. I've heard a couple of guys recently that are just absolutely burning young players, and they're young, they're 20s, and you're like, this guy needs a shot at some of the stuff. So why don't I recommend them for the gig that, and it's not like I'm just trying to say, oh, I'm too good for that gig, but it's like I've moved on to different stuff. If I'm not going to take that gig, let's let somebody who is young and wants a shot. Because that was me when I got out of college. I needed a shot, and David gave it to me. David called me. I wasn't anybody special. I was just a kid that he thought could play well when he heard me at SC, and it turned out really well for me.
Yeah, and for him.
Sure. We became friends and had a good and still have a good relationship after all these years,
Now, with the film, orchestral stuff, now how are you getting those gigs? Are you on the list with the contractor?
Yeah, any of those calls, and there are a lot of contractors in this town that I'm not on the list yet, but as they hear about
grows.
you were,
That kind of grows as you go.
That grows. There are a couple of contractors that call me a lot, and there are a couple of contractors who have called me a few times. Mm-hmm.
Are you always playing a kit?
Not always.
So sometimes they might call you to play as a percussionist.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the percussionists.
Exactly. And what I usually tell them for those is if they call me, I'll say, is this for drum set or for percussion? And they'll say, usually it's either drum set or it's both. Seldom am I called to only be in the section, but sometimes. And I'll say, okay, if I'm in the section, I'll read any of it, but if there's a whole bunch of difficult mallet stuff, can you please send me that ahead of time? Mm-hmm. I'm not, I can read mallets, it's fine, but I'm not as strong as somebody like M.B. Gordy or Brian Kilgore, or, these guys that are just burning mallet readers, Wade Culbreth, Mike Deutsch, who I just worked with the other day, who's brilliant mallet sight reading stuff, Yeah,
that seems almost like a whole nother instrument, really.
Well, it does, yes, but it kind of shouldn't be. If I had done more homework when I was younger, I'd be better at it,
Well.
But it didn't motivate. I wasn't excited about it when I was a kid. But that's not to say that I can't do it. I don't want to have to, like, if it's a particularly left-handed hard part, I want to look at it ahead of time. And usually if it's something that's hard, they're probably going to send it to you ahead of time anyway, like a day or two, so that you can just take a look at it and make sure it's not going to trip you up and hold up the session, because that's expensive.
Oh yeah. By the minute. Yeah.
By the minute. Those mistakes, we were on a date one time and they had messed up the drum part. We finished a take and the conductor's like, yeah, drums, what's happening in all these ensemble figures, like bar 45, bar this, bar all this stuff. Why aren't you playing it? I'm like, I don't have any of that. And he looks at his score and he's like, you're right, you don't. Can we get the drummer a proper part, please?
Oh.
So they have to go print a new part. And that takes, 3 or 4 minutes. that's expensive.
Yeah.
Orchestra's just sitting around.
80 people in the room,
Yeah.
plus an engineer, plus a studio, plus
Yep.
all these things that are going by the minute.
Yep.
Thousands of dollars. Yeah.
Yep. That
Lots
is
of
a
money.
very, very expensive drum part.
Really? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've had a pretty exciting career, diverse.
Yeah.
You don't play any keyboards or guitar or anything like that, right? You can play a little piano. I do know that because
a little
you
piano.
help me out sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
You go out before David Benoit would show up at the gig. I'd have you play piano for me, so that I could hear the piano.
It's funny though, being in my house, I'm married to a Juilliard trained, brilliant classical pianist.
You
So
feel like
in
dirt.
my house, I am definitely not allowed to say that I play the piano if you live with her. I am capable of getting by on things on the piano. We own a piano, but I am not a pianist by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But mostly for writing purposes is why I would play piano, and goofing around with different horn voicings or whatever. And you can visualize as well as hear them when you're working on the piano. So I play enough piano to be dangerous. My dad, I think, desperately wanted me to be a guitar player when I was a kid. They bought me a guitar. I took some lessons from him. And I can play like Day Tripper.
Oh, very good. That'll come in handy.
Yeah, someday when the Beatles cover band needs one song done,
Right,
I'm on it.
You're the man.
And I can get by a little bit on bass, and I've done that actually probably more than anything. Like I have a bass at home, and if I'm laying down a demo on something, I can just play the bass part. But it takes me a few takes, and I would never.
Yeah, but that's good knowledge and good for, like you said, for writing.
Yes,
you're not going to go out and take a gig as a bass player.
Never
or a guitar
would I
player
put
or
myself on
anything like that.
stage with a piano or a bass or I'm going to stick to drums there.
But it's good to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course. And the more you understand, I cannot play the trumpet, but I love understanding how the trumpet works. I had a girlfriend for a long time that was a trumpet player, and I would just like listen to her practice and go like, how does that, my saxophone player friends, I'm always asking questions about like their, what's that reed do? And why does this do this? And why does it, I find it fascinating to understand more and more about how all the other instruments work. And then as a drummer, it changes the way that you choose to, I think, choices that you make as a player, if you understand how the other instruments work.
Well, as an arranger, you've got to know all that stuff.
You have to know that stuff.
You have to know what the range
are,
is and what clef they're playing in, and all that stuff.
And what things, from a fingering standpoint might be awkward. Like if you know that you have to get from here to here, point A to point B, but if you do it in a certain way, it'll be difficult for them to play it. So you write it differently so that it's not, a certain skip or a certain lip thing or whatever. The more you understand about that stuff, the more effective you can be as an arranger. And but I think as a producer, for sure, understanding all of that stuff, because you'll understand blend and what you're trying to get out of the orchestra, articulations, things like that. But as a drummer, I think certainly drummers and lead trumpet players are the most responsible for dynamics and articulation and time, especially in a big band. So if I don't understand what the articulation, the symbols mean, first of all, like from a reading standpoint, if I don't understand articulation symbols, but to know how to listen for articulation, then I can't play effectively. I can't drive the band, but I also can't participate effectively. So yeah, the more of that the more musical you can be. Mm-hmm. And part of that is just understanding how the instruments work.
Yeah.
Right. Physically.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I've asked all the questions that I can think of asking. Is there anything else that you want to add?
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Little trip down memory lane for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. Because I don't want you to forget.
Oh man. The older you get, the harder that becomes, right?
It's true. All right. Well, then in that case, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you, Jamey, for making the trip out here.
Yeah.
It's a little trek for you.
That was all right.
But you know your way.
I do.
So thanks again for coming out. We're going to say goodbye to Jamey Tate. and wish you well with the rest of your career, and I hope all your dreams come true.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Ross.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye, everybody. The Rossaround Backstage podcast wants to thank my good friend, Tim Hines, for the original music that you are listening to now. We are currently looking for sponsors for the Rossaround Backstage podcast so that we can continue to bring you interesting stories like the one you just heard. I can be reached through Facebook or email me at rosspallone.com. Thank you for listening.